Our first speaker is down in Florida in the Tampa region. She is, her name is Rana Kochik, and she is passionate about technology and relationships that connect with our water and community. She's with Opti. She's an account executive and is available to answer any questions around the technology that you might have. Our other panelists include Rob Brown from GMC. He's a senior resource engineer with extensive experience in green infrastructure and low impact development. He provides technical guidance to engineers and municipalities and researchers in those initiatives. So we're excited to have him join us today. And last but not least is Erin Rothman, who has focused her entire career on climate tech to create transformative solutions for urban sustainability and community empowerment. So you're going to hear a couple of themes as Duran is talking. We really are focusing here on the technology, sustainability, and how the community should be involved with that. Without further ado, it's Rana Kochik.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And let's go ahead and get started. So the agenda, so Jennifer just ran through a bit of it. So let's take a look at, what is coastal resilience? What does that mean to us? What does that mean to our communities? Then we'll get a little bit into, what have we done in the past and what didn't quite work when it comes to infrastructure for storm, for a full amount of questions from the audience. So let's get into, what does it mean to be resilient? So it's the ability to bounce back after a storm. It's, the protection of people and property by natural and man-made infrastructure. And most important to me, it's the effective communication about the impacts and the solutions for the community. And, while we think about those three main aspects of resilience, one of the other things that kind of gets thrown around in the resilience conversation, not just in stormwater, but just overall, is the word sustainability. And there's a really great quote that I got a year ago, and I feel like it's been very helpful for me to contextualize everything. So I'm just going to read it really quick. Sustainability is the ability to continue important functions indefinitely without a decline in quality. Resilience is the ability to thrive in the face of change. Together, these two concepts identify today's key social, economic, and environmental goals to create systems that enhance rather than degrade the world around them, and in turn can withstand inevitable shocks from the environment and technology. Sustainability and resilience both require understanding of whole systems rather than individual pieces. And now today, we get to use data. We get to understand how real-time data allows us to make those better choices, of, what will create a net positive, and how do we move forward in this overall whole systems approach with a goal of resilience. Now let's dig in a little bit further into coastal resilience. So what does that specifically mean for us? Now, what are some of the factors that affect us? So climate hazards. So whether it's a wetland or a forest, if there's a 100-year storm event, right, it won't matter, but it does matter to people. It creates property damage, property loss, sometimes even loss of life when we have these huge storms, as the hurricane season's about to start here in June. So we really have to take a look at, what are these storms that are coming, and how do we as people create our living situations to be able to deal with that? Other factors affecting, again, people is sea level rise. So we've got water coming in one way and the other. How do we deal with all of these things? So sea level rise can, cause increased coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion into fresh water sources, and it can also inundate low-lying areas, prompting adaptation measures such as seawalls and even managed retreat to mitigate these risks. And then, further, again, we're talking about people, communities. Socioeconomic disparities can exacerbate these vulnerabilities. So in the first definition of resilience, we talked about ability to bounce back. So in order to bounce back, a lot of times you've got to have the economics to do so. So what are the, social, economic, equity type questions that we, even as engineers, need to ask to create a better, future for everyone involved? That might include income level, access to resources, education, healthcare. All of those things can affect a community's resilience. And what we can do is strengthen social cohesion to ensure that equitable access to resources, and then also fostering economic diversification. And then last but not least, most importantly, our ecosystem health, our mangroves, our coral reefs, there are natural buffers to assist us when we get that hurricane. So what can we do to protect them, improve them, so we can use them as those natural buffer zones, as that natural infrastructure to improve resiliency for our communities? So let's dig in even further. So let's go back. There we go. So how does stormwater impact our community's resilience? So here are the big four, right? I think this is probably the case for every community. Flooding is a huge issue. Of all the natural disasters that happen in the US, flooding is the most costly. It averages about $4 billion in damages and can cause up to 150 deaths per year in the US over the past research. Not so much maybe in the Southeast, but very common in the Northeast, where we've got CSOs are also a really big problem. Water quality, humongous problem here in Florida. I know, with all of the red tide events that we have sometimes, I'm sure that's the case for the other coastal communities, whether you be on the Atlantic or on the Gulf Coast. And then the last problem, stream erosion, right? When we've got these big storms, we design conveyance systems that are purely focused on quantity. Sometimes we get really, really deep erosion. And one of our case studies not covered today, but if you go on our website, look up Aiken, South Carolina, that is a lot of erosion that happened, and we were able to help with that. But either way, those four things are definitely issues that we as stormwater professionals have to deal with to get our communities to that goal of resilience. So let's dig in a little further in our conversation. So what are those challenges, right? We talked about current infrastructure, gray infrastructure in particular, has some limitations. And what are those? What is kind of stopping us in that resilience goal? So obviously we talked about climate change. Resources are limited, whether that be land, whether that be financial. The infrastructure that is already in place, a lot of it is aging. I saw a slide from another community, and it showed that most of their, gray infrastructure was installed pre-1990. So if we think about our stormwater manuals and some of the things that have changed and the requirements thereof, what were the design parameters, 40 or more years ago almost. And then when it also comes to, public and staff safety, someone having to go out in the middle of a storm to open a valve. Regulatory compliance, that's another issue. Storage and treatment, and funding and finance, we also covered that a little bit. And then of course, the last one, public perception. Having presented to the regular public a little bit ago, it's really interesting to see how the average homeowner sees or understands stormwater issues, and how that differs from how we as stormwater professionals see it. And finding that balance and finding a way to communicate and as we like to say in Opti, cross the chasm of communication. So let's learn a little bit more about how all of these pieces interplay together. So in the traditional design approach for stormwater infrastructure, there are a lot of site constraints, right? And especially as our coastal areas get developed more and more, the space for stormwater infrastructure might get more limited. So that's always been a big problem. Cost and disruption. The costs are always rising, whether that be in labor or products. Performance verifications, And then the last piece is traditional infrastructure for stormwater has most of the time been passive. And it really can't adapt. Once it's in the ground, it's, set it and that's it, we're done. So what are some of the things that we can change? And we're going to get into that with real-time data. So moving on, one of the things that we can do is to go from our traditional design using just gray infrastructure is we can invite diversity, not just, in the community with people, but we can invite diversity in our designs. And, many of you, I'm sure, have been exposed to green infrastructure, low impact development. Even on a homeowner scale, a rain garden can be so helpful for removing nutrients and helping that neighborhood stormwater pond. And then the last piece of the equation would be smart infrastructure. So continuous monitoring and adaptive control is definitely a great application of smart infrastructure. And now how do we combine all of that together to then create resilience for everybody, for our communities? So let's dig in a little further. So Jennifer and I are with Opti, as we mentioned earlier, and our goal as a company is to create clean water and resilient communities. We are the leading provider in digital adaptive stormwater control solutions. We empower our customers and their partners and their communities, enabling them to secure the sustainability of our communities and natural resources. With our commitment to innovation, we are driving a resilient and brighter future for all. So it is in our goal to achieve this very resilience that we all in the stormwater industry are seeking. And so how are we doing that? So we have three major drivers. We want to ensure that we provide economic sustainability. So making sure that the deployments that we have create a net economic savings. We want to make sure that they're resilient, right? So we've managed over 26,000 storms, and typically we get a 5 to 10 times performance improvement using this adaptive methodology. And then most importantly, we want to create peace of mind. So currently we're installed in 3 countries and 37 states and growing. And one of the other last pieces, when we think about peace of mind is, when we come to talk about the safety of staff is, being able to see the performance of the infrastructure in real time in a safe office, not having to go out in the middle of a storm. I think that's a really great benefit overall for everybody. All right. And then taking it to the last piece, our motto is we dare, we care, and we deliver. So we want to share that motto with you through our case studies and how we are able to help our communities. And here is a little bit of information about where we are. So these are all of our deployments. As you can see from the map, we are mostly in coastal communities. That's, except for the ones that are more inland, we're dealing more with CSOs. But a lot of the flooding issues, the water quality issues, that communities are addressing are happening in coastal areas. So Opti started back in 2010 as a shoot off from a consulting company, and we've been growing and developing and improving ever since. And here we are in the year 2024 with a wonderful team of engineers, of product managers. And everybody's just excited to bring smart infrastructure to the US and beyond. And we've worked with several regulatory agencies, such as the Chesapeake Bay Program, the Maryland Department of Environment, the Washington TAPE Program, North Hudson Sewerage Authority, and the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And we also have some strategic partners, such as Microsoft, National Stormwater Trust, who's also joining us, the Nature Conservancy, and Brightstorm. So, we've been around and we've been able to demonstrate that how we help. So what is part of, what does Opti technically do? So part of our ecosystem is being adaptable, right? So if we think about traffic, the way that the highway, the interstate looks at 7:30 and then, wait 10 minutes, it's a completely different scene. That's the same thing with weather, right? It might be super nice and bright outside, and then give it a few minutes and there's a, random thunderstorm that we tend to have here in the evenings and the afternoons. So how can you design stormwater infrastructure that's adaptive to such stark changes? And we can do that with real-time monitoring and control. So if we think about a typical urban stormwater collection system, we've got the community, and then we've got our stormwater system that might go into a vault, a pond, or a form of green infrastructure. And then it ends up in the receiving body. For our sewerage system, it goes to the water treatment plant, it treats it, and then it goes into the receiving body. And one most important thing to note here is the stormwater does not get treated. Maybe it gets some treatment from the natural landscape, from the green infrastructure or the plants along a pond, but that's it. So whatever happens in the urban environment directly impacts the receiving waters. And there's no control about how much water, what quality, when. You have no control of how that water is moving once it falls. Now, if we think about an adaptive system, we get to add and we get to have a little bit more control. So through continuous monitoring and adaptive control, we are able to get insight. So what do we add here? So through Opti, we're taking in weather data and third-party data to then control the level of the pond or level of a vault. We get to control when the water is released. So that insight and control definitely changes the picture for a stormwater manager, because they're able to see in real time what is happening with that piece of infrastructure. B, they're able to control from the safety of their office what is happening, or use the inbuilt platform to decide when to open and close a valve at what time to create the best scenario for that infrastructure piece, whether that's improving water quality or mitigating erosion. So that is the benefit of having extra insight. And furthermore, when we talk about the different things that real-time monitoring and adaptive control can bring you, it's one platform, multiple benefits. So with one software and the associated hardware, you can control at various points in time. You can control for flood mitigation, hydro modification. In the case of communities that have combined sewers, you can control for that, combined sewer overflows. You can improve water quality. You can create water conservation. We have a project where there is a vault below a building, and that stormwater is then piped up to the rooftop where there's a rooftop garden. So that stormwater is being conserved and reused, which is really wonderful. And then last but not least, maximize asset performance. You get that insight, what's happening in real time and what can I do? All right, so the two components of a continuous monitoring and adaptive control system include the software and the hardware. So for the software, we are using precipitation information, so typically a forecast, to then drive what happens with the hardware. We have a web portal that's access for O&M, and then we can also integrate with third-party providers. So if you wanted to connect your SCADA to Opti, you could do that. And then the other side of it is the real world side, right? So when you go to that piece of infrastructure, whether that be an underground vault or a stormwater pond or another form of stormwater asset. So the hardware includes actuated valves or a pump. It includes level sensors. It controls a control box that's sending all of that data to the cloud, where the stormwater manager or the O&M manager can then see what's happening with that asset in real time. So to summarize, we partner with third-party infrastructure providers to deliver the hardware and storage solution. On top of that, we layer IoT devices to control the rate, timing, and discharge based on the forecast. And then the unique part of Opti is that we can integrate that third-party forecast, such as NOAA or Tomorrow.io and SCADA to create almost like that, right? The smart infrastructure that we saw earlier. All right, so this is what it looks like in the real world. So the left picture, you can see the stormwater structure, right? So this is the overflow. And then you are maybe not able to see right in the left picture, but in the right picture, you can see inside there's a valve that's connected to a control box. And in this case, we've got a solar panel and a rain gauge as well. And then on the right-hand picture, it's showing an underground storage solutions. So same thing, you've got an actuator and a valve assembly, a pressure transducer, the control box. There's also a stilling well, and then you're able to see the outlet structure here as well. So various applications for the same technology, you just get to use it in a different way. All right, so what does a stormwater manager see, once they want that insight into the system? So from their computer, they're able to see this screen. So it has a manual override if someone wants to take it out of the system. They can see the current conditions, they can see the forecast, they can also see whether it's online or not. So that's also really important when considering the information. And then on the right side of the screen, they're able to see their managed storage, their cumulative rain gauge, as well as the valve position. And all of that data can also be exported. So if there was multiple areas that you wanted to share that information to, you can also share the screen as a view only with other members of your community, whether that be other people within the city staff that just want insight into how it's operating. Or maybe this might be a project where you want to, empower the community to see what's going on with that, control thing by the pond. Well, they can go and look it up themselves without, any issues of them changing anything with a view-only access. So that's pretty great as well. Okay, so let's talk about, how all of it works. So if we go back to the passive model, right? So we'll have dry weather. There will be a rain event, the level of the pond increases. And then once it gets to the level of the overflow structure, it gets released downstream. And that release might happen very quickly at a very high velocity, which might be damaging downstream, causing erosion, water quality issues, things like that. Now, let's layer a CMAX system on that. So if you take a look at the blue line, what are we able to do? Well, based on the forecast, we can cause a pre-event drawdown. So we can lower the level of the pond just enough to create adaptive storage using the pond or underground structure that you already have. So as it fills up, right, we see the level here rising. And then one key difference, if you take a look, the orange line, it goes to a peak and immediately goes down, right? You're releasing as soon as it gets up to that level. But if you take a look at the teal line, it holds the level steady just below the overflow volume. And what happens during that time is that's where you're kind of banking on your water quality. So by allowing the particulates, the phosphorus to settle out over time, you're improving the water quality that then gets released downstream. And then you're also, by controlling the valve, you're also able to control the rate of release. So maybe you release after a storm event at a lower rate, so it causes less erosion as well. So you're kind of getting like a BOGO here, right? You're getting that water quality and erosion control by being able to hold the valve closed and then releasing it slowly after the rain event has passed. So when we think about the design project, we have to think about the drivers of this project, but also the application, right? So some of the drivers include flooding and water quality. And so the application thereof is, optimizing that existing asset. A driver could be cost and land availability. So maybe by using, continuous monitoring and adaptive controls, you are able to use the land more effectively. Maybe you needed way more storage, but now you can control the storage that you have. So you're better able to develop that land compared to, having a humongous stormwater pond. And then the last driver here is resiliency, right? That's why we're here today. Resiliency and environmental compliance and a smart watershed network can definitely help with that. So when we think about all of these controls and the software associated with it, there's often a lot of questions about security, reliability, and redundancy. And, just like any good engineer, we've built that into our system. So we've got cloud-based alarms. We've got remote manual control that you can change it into. We've got internationally certified data centers, as well as product release cycles and third-party security audits. And then from a mechanical perspective, we've got battery backups, local fail-safe logic, and on-site manual control, so you can literally change it at the control panel. And then from a civil design perspective, you can always go back to a passive overflow and get downstream condition assessment. All right, so just a little bit more about the CMAQ solution design. Again, when we think about passive assets, right, the regular traditional way of building stormwater infrastructure, once it's in the ground, you can't change anything about it. But one of the things that's great about CMAQ is that adaptation. So even once you get the hardware installed, you're not done. We can still optimize it. And that's the thing that's really beautiful about the system. So in a typical design process, we can identify stormwater challenges, select the behaviors, and then establish and refine the key parameters and develop a H&H model and simulations. But even, once installed or even during the design process, we can keep going back and changing those parameters to what a community might need. And one example I'll quickly give is, we have dry weather times, right? Dry seasons and wet seasons. And those different seasons might drive what is needed for that piece of infrastructure. So we can change the settings to then deliver on that result. So if we want to hold on to water longer, or if we want to release it sooner, we can keep changing all those parameters to what is needed in the moment or what is needed for the season. And that's one of the things that's really, really awesome, is because you're not stuck with what was built. You can keep working on it. You can be adaptive, you can optimize, and you can be resilient through all those different changes. And this is one of the things that we just talked about as well. So we talked about the 5 different stacked benefits, right, earlier, about dealing with flooding and water quality and erosion control and asset performance indicators. If we think about that curve that we saw earlier about, as the water rises, let's say within a stormwater pond, it goes up and we hold on to it. Well, what we're really controlling for is either shifting that peak, right? Either causing the release earlier or later, or we can smoothen the peak. And that's why all of these different changes that we can do in the optimization stage of a project, or in the design stage, we can invite those behaviors within the system. Yeah. So we've got a whole bunch of really great webinars on our website. They're called the CMAQ Design Series. and our hydroinformatics engineer, Kenneth, and our project manager, Rosa. They go through all the weeds of how all of this happens. So I invite you guys to take a look over there and get a little deeper if you have some specific questions into all of that. Okay, and then just last time through, passive control, it's really hard to control what happens. And then if we have CMAC, we can control those behaviors. And if you take a look at this particular slide, right, there was a pre-event drawdown. It fills up during the storm, but then there was even more water during the storm, and there might have been a possible overflow event. So even in the middle of the storm, we're able to adapt, and we're able to gently just release a little bit to then create even more storage as the bigger storm continues. So if you see that little divot in the center of the storm, and then once the storm event passes, again, hold on to it, get that water quality benefit, and then release at a nice slow rate, controlling for erosion. Okay, and then let's run through some of our case studies. So we've got Statesboro, Georgia, Castleberry, Florida, and Ormond Beach. And quickly, we just want to say that, we love working with our communities as well as our consultant partners. Your local expertise plus our technology creates the clean water and resilient communities that we're all looking to have. All right, and sometimes it involves building that smart watershed network, and we've touched on that before. So let's dig into Statesboro, Georgia really quick. So they had some flooding issues and regularly, had some complaints of roadway flooding near the Lake Sal area. So to mitigate that risk, the city needed to improve storage for a 25 and 100-year storm event. And then using the existing system, it would require extensive rehabilitation with an anticipated cost of up to $11 million. So on this project, Goodwin Mills Kaywood, GMC, they developed a watershed model of Lake Sal under Task Order 3. And the results of that model showed that under current conditions, a 25-year event would cause the culverts and channels entering Lake Sal to exceed capacity, and then cause flooding upstream. And so a solution that was proposed was using CMAC. So one of the benefits that CMAC created is, looking at the entire watershed. So upstream of Lake Sal is where a lot of the flooding, in the past had happened. So we really needed buy-in of the community to create that improvement on the outflow control structure to then be able to mitigate the flooding upstream. And this is such a great story of community engagement and adaptation, because through a concerted effort of the city, the consultant and Opti, we are able to communicate with the homeowners of, what does this system that doesn't directly impact them, how does it impact their entire community, and how can they be part of the solution to improve the overall watershed, thus improving the overall flooding problems that had been there in the past. So this is an ongoing project, but I feel like this was just such a great study of resilience through community engagement. And some of the, can go back. Okay, and then some of the benefits here is, reduced CapEx, resilience through flood mitigation, and improvement of public safety. So the second case study that we have here is Castleberry, Florida. This is just a little north of Orlando. And the project that we had here was installing just monitoring for this G Creek, which feeds into Lake Catherine. So this improved asset management for this community because it gave them visibility to what was happening at that creek in real time, so they can then take the actions that they need to mitigate any flooding that might happen in the surrounding neighborhoods of Lake Catherine. And so, over the course of, I think, the past like 7 years we've been there, just monitoring, providing them data so they can make those decisions for their community. And the benefits thereof, of course, that peace of mind is the biggest benefit. And I'll just read the quick quote from Kelly Brock, the Public Works Director. Real-time telemetry, coupled with the city's previous modeling efforts, has enabled the city to better prepare for and respond to major storm events. So I think that's been really great that we were able to help with this. All right, final piece de resistance here, Ormond Beach. Let's talk about hurricanes. So back in 2009, there was an unnamed storm. It caused 27 inches of rain. They did not have enough storage to deal with that unprecedented amount of rain. And unfortunately, it caused over $50 million worth of damages in a neighborhood surrounding 5 lakes. And so these are these interconnected lakes, and the areas that flooded were the surrounding neighborhood. The city of Ormond Beach was able to secure FEMA funding after that 2009 storm. And then they had a few options of what do they do with the money? And so they could build a new pump station to keep the water below flood stage, or they could allow CMAQ to control the pump station. And so the costs were $8 million for a new pump station or $200,000 for the software. And software and hardware. So they decided to go with CMAQ, and this created a CapEx savings of $7.8 million. And then in 2017, the whole system, Opti, was really tested because Irma came through. And let's see what happened during Irma and Ormond Beach. So during Irma, we were constantly monitoring the storm, but CMAQ was doing all the work. So right as the forecast was coming in, we slowly started inviting a pre-event drawdown, lowering the level of one of the ponds. And as you see in this graph here, the red represents what would have happened if CMAQ were not installed. So you see, the level would have stayed around 3 feet. The hurricane came in, it would have gotten to flood elevation of 5 feet. So you see they got 8.7 inches of rain over the course of 3 days. But thanks to CMAQ, we were able to cause a pre-event drawdown, create adaptive storage using the site they already have. And even though it rained, all those inches during that time, during Hurricane Irma, the neighborhood still didn't flood. Yes, the level increased, right, to 4 feet, but it was still below that flood elevation. And that's how we are creating continuous resilience for that community. And then here is a quick image of Hurricane Dorian and some of the forecasts that came with it. And then in the next image here, this was also from Hurricane Dorian. One of the things that we want to point out is if you take a look at the water level chart here, the city engineer actually took remote control. And this is that, last piece of being adaptable. So the system can run on its own using forecast data, but if for whatever reason, city management wants to take control over the system, they can by just pushing a button on a screen and then making the decisions that they need to protect their community. And with that, I want to be mindful of our time. So thank you guys so much for listening to our presentation so far. We're going to jump right in to our quick little panel discussion and then create time at the end for any audience questions. So if we can unmute Rob. So Dr. Rob Brown will be our first little panelist. Dr. Brown is a senior resource engineer with GMC, Goodwin Mills Kaywood, based out of Brunswick, Georgia. Rob has extensive experience in green infrastructure and low impact development, as well as stormwater management. He is a licensed civil engineer and has completed a postdoctoral fellowship with the US EPA's National Risk Management Research Lab to study green infrastructure and low impact development practices. So Rob, today we're going to ask you this question. In the communities that you serve as a consultant engineer, how receptive has stormwater leadership been to the paradigm shift of adaptive controls to meet their resilience needs?
Thanks, Rana. I would say that they're very receptive to it. I've only reached out to a few different public works and engineering department leadership at the municipalities I work with in coastal Georgia, and they've been very interested and excited about the opportunity to use continuous monitoring adaptive control at some of their project sites where they've experienced flooding issues. They've been very receptive to this being a new tool for them to use, primarily because a lot of the areas where they've had some major flooding have been very built out, so there's very limited space for new regional detention. And two of the applications basically took an existing lake or pond that had a fairly large surface area, and they were able to look to create a design where they would be able to draw down that water level a couple of feet ahead of a storm to create as much storage as they would be able to get at a brand new facility, just due to the space constraints of constructing a new facility. But then it also just provides tremendous cost savings to be able to utilize that existing infrastructure versus building a brand new system.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for answering that question, Rob. And if any of you in the audience are inspired to do any follow-up questions, we'll get to it after these other two panelists. So our second person answering a question is going to be Erin Rothman. She is the managing director of Merrick Labs, who created a resilience analytics platform powered by their GIFT framework. GIFT provides tailored risk assessment and adaptation strategies by integrating urbanization with climate impacts related primarily to heat and flood risk, empowering communities to actively and effectively address climate-related risks. So, Erin, today we'll be asking you, how does real-time data help with coastal resilience planning, so land use planning?
Hi. So there's a number of different ways that it helps on the planning side, even though it might not necessarily sound like it. Firstly, of course, it serves as an early warning system. So when we are dealing with storm surge or other flood related issues, we have that data we have that data as it's coming in, and we can set different thresholds that we can then use to notify property owners of that risk as that water is moving through. That then ties into risk assessment and management of that land. So when we're able to capture that data, we can track and identify trends of water, for example, sea level rise, demonstrating that water level is moving up. So for example, if you're working on a comprehensive plan for your community and you're looking at new development, you're going to be possibly considering wetland migration. You'll be looking at additional stormwater runoff from impervious surfaces. You might be removing some tree canopy. So if you're removing those stormwater controls from the inside or the inland areas, and then you're also losing those coastal areas, you want to be able to understand how those impacts affect the community. And you also want to understand the timing of those impacts. So again, being able to track those trends over time gives you an idea of whether sea level rise is happening, where it's impacted your communities, and then also oftentimes taking that data and using it to get some kind of grant funding for coastal resiliency projects to protect your community as you continue development. And that leads, of course, to adaptive planning. We all know about infrastructure maintenance and management, so that ties in very closely to everything that you just talked about, Sarana. And then, of course, the community engagement side. A lot of times people can't grasp what seems like a very complex topic in some circumstances. So being able to have the data that shows who's impacted where is incredibly helpful when you're telling the story about what is happening within your community, how that's going to impact your community over the long term, and why you're looking at the different adaptation strategies that you are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Wrapping up, we'll be going back to Jessica Brown from UGA. So just for those of you that don't know her, many of you do, but she serves as a stormwater specialist for UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant, and is a water resource engineer and career extension professional, having worked at several land and sea grant universities on the East Coast, wading through streams and marshes and local policy, helping communities to address the challenges of stormwater runoff, flooding, and non-point source solution. So, Jessica, today we're going to be asking you, what is the biggest need from your point of view in achieving our resiliency goals? As a career extension professional connecting academia, professionals, and the public, what can we do better?
Thanks, Rana. I appreciate the opportunity to jump in on this, and I am really grateful after hearing Rob and Erin's questions. I thought I had a heavy hitter, but did a great job with that. As far as the biggest need, I think the thing that stands out and something that you've touched on today quite a bit is access and the connectivity of resources. And so traditionally we think about resources, funding and data, or the science that support those data, but also the access to the technology as well as the expertise. And so in thinking about that holistically, more of as an ecosystem, also layering in the timing of the accessibility of those resources. Many of these decisions, and I think several of your case studies highlight that well, but timing is of the essence. And so being able to not only access them, but access them in a manner to have better informed decision making, as well as being able to access funding, technology, data, expertise in a way that's understandable. And so when we're linking all of that community together, being mindful of everybody's ability to not only understand their own risk tolerance, but their ability to digest the resources that are being offered. So I'd say that's probably our biggest challenge. You finished that with a follow-up as far as what we can do better, and really excited about that as an example for today. I think being open to connections and communicating experience. Everyone knows something that we don't. And so, and much of what we know is learned experientially. And so transparent communication that's understandable, relatable, and there again, the timing of it is just really of the essence. And so I appreciate you leading by example with that today, but something I certainly think that we could use in the future.
Wow, very awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jessica. It was really great insight from your point of view, and we can all learn from it. So I'm going to shift it now to Jennifer and allow her to navigate our other Q&A and questions that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, we do have a question from the audience. They ask, Brunswick is full of underserved communities. This speaks to the socioeconomic factors that you talked about at the beginning of your presentation. And when the city is making capital improvements around flood mitigations, are these technologies being applied in these communities so that everyone can have a benefit in an equitable manner? Jessica or Rob, you might have some to input here, because I know you are in the Brunswick area. If you could speak at all to what's being done on the social justice or the, environmental justice, the equity talks at the when it comes to stormwater.
I'll take the first part or answer part of it, and then maybe pass it over to Jessica to elaborate if she has any other thoughts with it. But one of the projects that I mentioned that I had some experience with that that have been able to engage actually the public works director at City of Brunswick, and that's one of the projects where we're looking at implementing with some CMAQ. That project's in the planning stage right now. We're just trying to finalize the things with the grant scope so that we can get that project underway. But that's in an area of the City of Brunswick that will be providing some of that flood mitigation. But I'm not sure if Jess or Zorani want to talk some more about other applications in underserved areas from Opti, or just in general with stormwater in those areas.
Jessica, if you want to go, and then I'll wrap it up with some other.
Sure. Yeah. I won't speak specifically to some of the newer technologies in these communities, but particularly in terms of place-based application in Brunswick, I think one of the biggest pieces, and in the Ormond Beach project, I think demonstrated that well, is being able to take a step back and look not only on the planning side, but also on a retrofit side, as where are some of the cost savings. And so thinking about better ways to engage in an equitable manner, making sure that we're not only addressing the solution, but being really good stewards of those resources. And I do think that Brunswick is moving in that direction, and I will look forward to some of those technological advancements that you all are referencing.
Thanks, Jessica. So to kind of finalize that question about equity, access to resources. So from a grants perspective, I'm not any expert on it, but just based on some of the webinars that I've attended about how does the grant application process work. One of the things that I've seen consistently is equity is one of the key drivers. So if you as a city or a consultant, if you're applying for a grant, you have to be able to answer equity questions. So who is that going to benefit? And then taking the conversation back to data, a lot of that data is already available. What community has the most need? What community in a city had the hardest time recovering from the last storm event? That data is available. So you as a professional maybe seeking a grant on behalf of that community or the overall city, you can speak on that data to then drive where does that grant funding need to go? Who's going to get it? How are they going to get it? What technology is going to serve that community the best? And that's where that ecosystem point of view, watershed point of view, whole community system point of view needs to be looked at. Being able to balance the need to the access, to the funding, to the technology, looking at all of it at the same time.
Definitely a balancing game, right? And I do love that our industry is starting to look at this more and more on the equity side of things, recognizing that that the disadvantaged communities are exponentially impacted more by stormwater than other areas of the city. I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. Here's a short one. Someone's asked for if we're open to partnerships with universities, and I will happily say yes, we are. We're glad to be working with Jessica and looking forward to that relationship to continue to build. And I'll note that we've had significant involvement with NC State, as well as Villanova are probably 2 of our top universities that we've engaged with. There are several others, but those are the ones that stand out. And I'm hoping UGA is right behind them. So thank you very much for asking. Another short, quick question is, when's our next webinar? Right. So where our next webinar is in June. Date is not set in stone just yet. So look for announcements on our LinkedIn page. I invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, and you should also be getting an email. On that note, we will be sending out a follow-up email thanking all of you for your attendance, but also sharing these slides and some other pertinent information that you might find useful. You can respond to that email and it'll go to me or Zorana, and we'll be glad to answer any questions. And I'm certain that we can forward along our other panelists if you have questions for them as well. With that, I think I'll wrap up. Zorana, do you have any last minute words of wisdom to share before we close it out?
I think I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time. Thank you for being open-minded. Thank you for sharing your points of view, all the panelists. And I invite all of you to, as you, think about approaches, whether, your work or daily life, how can I maybe shift my perspective a little bit and maybe get a different result? So, continue to challenge yourself to think differently.
Excellent. Well, thank you and have a wonderful day. We look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Bye-bye.